The microphone made a dry, hollow click, the kind that cuts through a crowded room and makes everyone go still without knowing why. Then Lieutenant Commander Harmon's voice followed, precise and polished, carrying the practiced authority of a man accustomed to being the last word in any conversation. Today's K-9 retirement ceremony represents the United States Navy's commitment to honoring 11 exceptional service animals who have completed their operational duty with distinction. Approved adoption candidates will be called in order of priority registration. The Pendleton Naval Base Reception Hall held 63 people that afternoon, March 14th, 2019, 1400 hours. Rows of folding chairs faced a low stage where 11 kennels were arranged in a single line, each occupied by a dog that had seen more of the world's worst places than most people in that room ever would. Officers in pressed dress blues filled the front 3 rows. Behind them sat military families, a cluster of journalists with lanyards and cameras, 2 civilian canine adoption organizations with color-coded binders, and a canine handling veteran named Sergeant First Class Dale Briggs, who had spent 31 years training dogs for units that the public wasn't supposed to know existed. Nobody in that room gave a second glance to the woman standing near the back wall. She was wearing a gray cotton shirt that had been washed enough times to lose most of its original color. Her hair was pulled back in a tight, functional knot at the base of her skull. Not styled to look unstylied, just contained. She wore faded cargo pants and running shoes that had logged serious mileage. No lanyard, no binder, no name tag, no unit patch, nothing to announce her presence as anything other than someone who had wandered into the wrong building and not yet been told. When Harmon's opening statement concluded with a breath, her voice came out of the back of the room like a stone dropped into still water. "I'll take all of them." The ripple started at the back and moved forward. A young enlisted man near the aisle turned first, then the couple beside him, then the row ahead. Someone laughed, a short, disbelieving sound quickly suppressed. Major Ellen Chen, standing beside the stage with a clipboard pressed to her chest, looked up from her paperwork with the expression of a woman who had just heard a car alarm go off in a library. Sergeant First Class Briggs didn't laugh. He studied the woman with the flat, unhurried assessment of someone who spent decades reading animals and had learned that the most dangerous thing in any situation was what you didn't recognize. He crossed his arms and waited. Commander Harmon set his folder of approved adoption paperwork down on the podium. He looked toward the back of the room with the careful patience of a man choosing his words around a situation he had not planned for. "Ma'am," he said, "this is not an animal shelter. These dogs have advanced military conditioning. They require certified handlers, appropriate facilities, and formal approval through the Naval Canine Transition Program. Not everyone qualifies." The woman didn't respond. She didn't shift her weight or look away. She simply stood, shoulders squared, feet set at exactly shoulder width, hands loose at her sides. It was the kind of stillness that required training to produce, not temperament. The kind that came from standing in places where moving at the wrong moment carried consequences. Corporal Ray Vance, the facility's youngest security detail, caught a signal from Harmon's eyes and moved toward the back wall. He reached the woman and placed a guiding hand on her shoulder. She didn't move. Vance applied light pressure. Light. The woman's shoulder yielded like a wall, not with resistance exactly, more with the absence of yielding that made you suddenly aware of the difference between someone who didn't notice your hand and someone who was choosing to ignore it. In the corner near the emergency exit, a man in his late 50s stood with his hands clasped at the small of his back and watched. Master Chief Petty Officer Raymond Wallace hadn't spoken to anyone since arriving 20 minutes early. He'd positioned himself where he could see both the stage and the entrance. He was watching the woman near the back wall with an expression that was doing its best to stay neutral and not quite succeeding. He'd seen that stance before, that particular way of occupying space without consuming it. He pulled out his phone and typed a name into a search field connected to a database that most people in the room didn't know existed. Meanwhile, Dana Rice from the San Diego Tribune leaned toward her camera operator and pointed discreetly toward the back of the room. "That's the shot," she said, low enough not to carry. "Woman tries to adopt a whole litter of military dogs. Human interest piece. Get her face." The camera operator angled his lens. The woman didn't react. Not a flinch, not a glance toward the camera. She either didn't notice or had made a decision about noticing that the rest of the room hadn't caught up with. Harmon tried once more, his voice carrying the kind of diplomatic patience that preceded bureaucratic escalation. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to either present your pre-registration paperwork or step outside and speak with our administrative staff." The woman looked at him. "I worked with these dogs," she said. 4 words, no elaboration. The room didn't laugh this time. The silence that followed had a different texture, still skeptical, still dismissive in places, but edged now with something uncertain. Briggs uncrossed his arms. He'd been reading animals for 3 decades. He recognized the particular quiet that preceded something unexpected. "Worked with them how?" Briggs asked, his voice carrying across the room without effort. The challenge in it was casual, comfortable, the voice of a man who knew the right answer before the question finished. She didn't answer him either. Before we go further, if this story has already caught your attention, you're not alone. Thousands of viewers have already hit subscribe because they know every time we post, something real happens on this channel. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss a story like this one. It's completely free. And what's coming in the next few minutes of this video? You're going to want to be sitting down. Briggs unfolded his arms and took a slow step toward the stage. He looked at Harmon, then at the 11 kennels behind him, then back at the woman with the careful deliberation of a man who had decided to make a point. "You want to demonstrate something? Fine." He moved toward the last kennel on the right. "I'll make this real simple. This is Zeus, Belgian Malinois, 34 kilograms, 8 years of operational service. In the last 9 months, he's put 3 experienced handlers in medical. Not because he's broken, it's because he's selective. He doesn't accept strangers." Briggs put his hand on the kennel latch. "If this dog lets you within arm's reach, I'll fill out your paperwork myself." The room went completely still. The 2 civilian adoption representatives exchanged a glance. Major Chen took a half step backward. Corporal Vance moved closer to the side wall in a way that positioned him between the woman and the door, though he wasn't entirely sure why. Briggs pulled the kennel door open. Zeus came out low and fast, muscle compressing under black and tan fur, ears flat, lips pulled back in a warning that needed no translation. Several people in the third row leaned back simultaneously. The dog planted its feet 10 feet from the woman and issued a sound from somewhere below vocal, a vibration more than a sound, the kind that registers in the chest before the ears. The woman looked at Zeus, not the wide, startled look of someone confronting an unexpected animal, not the carefully controlled steadiness of someone managing fear. She looked at him the way you look at something you recognize, familiar in a way that went deeper than sight. Her chin dropped a fraction. Her weight shifted forward almost imperceptibly, toward the dog instead of away. Zeus held his ground for 3 seconds, then 5. His ears moved, 1 degree, then 2, swiveling forward from their flattened position. His nose worked in sharp, decisive pulls. Then he walked toward her. Not the charge of a dog making a decision, the measured approach of an animal arriving at a conclusion it had already reached. He stopped 18 inches from her outstretched hand, pushed his muzzle into her palm, and sat down. The tail moved. Slow, deliberate sweeps, not the frantic happiness of a rescue dog finding a treat, but the quiet recognition of something that had been waiting. The room didn't breathe. Briggs stood with one hand still on the open kennel door and said nothing. His jaw was set in the particular way of a man who has made a public prediction and is processing the moment it fails. Dana Rice had her camera up now, recording without remembering to direct her operator to do so. In the corner, Wallace looked down at his phone screen. The search had returned 3 words and a symbol. Access denied. Classification secret. He put the phone in his pocket, looked up. The expression on his face had completed its journey from neutral to something that was not quite alarm and not quite recognition, and was exactly the space between. Briggs recovered first. "The dog responds to scent and conditioning," he said, loud enough for the room. "That's a trained response. It doesn't certify anything." He looked at Harmon. "This doesn't change the registration requirement." Harmon nodded, grateful for the anchor. "Sergeant Briggs is correct. The behavioral response is interesting, but we have protocols." He picked up his folder. "We'll proceed with registered candidates. She has documentation." The voice came from Major Chen, quiet, almost reluctant. The clipboard was in her hands, and on top of it was a folded piece of paper. The woman had placed it there 2 minutes ago without ceremony, and Chen had opened it, read it, and spent those 2 minutes deciding what she was looking at. She still wasn't entirely sure, but the letterhead alone had made her certain she was not going to be the person who dismissed it without review. She held the paper out toward Harmon. He took it with the measured composure of a man who refused to appear uncertain in front of 63 people. He read it. Once. Then again, more slowly. He said nothing. The room watched him read, watched his hands, which didn't move, watched his face, which worked very hard at maintaining an expression it was no longer certain was appropriate. The woman near the back wall looked at nothing in particular and waited. It was Marlene Torres who broke the secondary silence, not intentionally, not loudly, but with the inevitable momentum of someone whose private recognition had become too large to contain. She was seated in the second row, a compact woman in her early 50s in a navy blue blazer, holding a photograph pressed against her knee. Her husband, Sergeant First Class Miguel Torres, had been assigned to a K-9 operational unit before his death in 2017. She had brought the photograph to today's ceremony because she did it every year, a habit of grief that had hardened into ritual. The photograph showed Miguel with a dog, a Belgian Malinois, black and tan, photographed somewhere flat and pale. Kandahar, she had always assumed, from the quality of the light. And beside the dog, out of frame on the left edge, was the beginning of a figure, a shoulder, an arm, a hand on the dog's lead that had been cut out of every version of this photo she had ever received. The original, she had been told, was classified. She looked at the photograph, then at the dog currently sitting beside the woman at the back of the room, the dog that Briggs had called Ghost, not Zeus, Ghost. The Belgian Malinois that had been in the kennel second from the end, that had watched the entire proceeding from behind its kennel door with the particular stillness of an animal that had been patient a long time. Marlene Torres said nothing, but her right hand closed around the photograph until the edges bent. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, 26 years old and 18 months into his first posting, was seated at the end of a row near the aisle with his tablet on his knee. He had run the name the way any thorough junior officer would, fully and quietly, with the expectation of finding nothing more interesting than a civilian contractor record. What he'd found instead was a locked door at a classification level that his current clearance could see the outside of, but not open. 27 Delta, she had told him. He had typed it in. MOS 27 Delta, cross-referenced with the Naval K-9 Transition Program, cross-referenced with DevGru. The results had come back in fragments, most of them redacted, a few of them not. He had looked at those fragments for a long time. Then he had looked up at the woman. She was watching him, not with hostility, with the calm patience of someone who had let someone else discover a thing and was waiting for them to finish processing it. Webb put his tablet face down on his knee. Right now, before the biggest reveal of this entire story, take 5 seconds and drop a comment. Do you think they'll figure out who she really is? Type ghost if you think they already suspect something, or blind if you think they're still completely clueless. Your comment might end up pinned. We read every single one. And if this story is hitting different, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. We'll be right back. The ceremony had begun again. Harmon had chosen forward momentum over the alternative, and the first registered adoption candidate, a civilian K-9 trainer named Robert Ashe, had been called to the stage. He was professional, experienced, and prepared, with a 200-page application binder and 3 facility inspection reports. The dog he was being paired with, a 7-year-old German Shepherd named Bravo 7, was pacing his kennel with the anxious energy of an animal that had been in institutional care too long. When Ashe opened the kennel door and stepped forward, Bravo 7 backed up. The handler kept his body language open and slow, the way you were taught, the way the manuals described. The dog tolerated his approach but didn't relax, kept his weight back, ears unsteady. From the back of the room, a single word in Dutch, spoken at conversation volume. Roestig! Bravo 7 stopped moving. His ears came forward. He looked toward the back of the room with the focused attention of an animal that had just heard something it recognized. Ashe turned around. Several people near him turned. Briggs, who was standing to the right of the stage, turned last, and the look on his face when he found the source wasn't surprise exactly. more like a man confirming a suspicion he'd been refusing to commit to. The woman was looking at Bravo 7, not at any of the people watching her. She gave the dog a short, deliberate nod, an acknowledgement, or a release, or both. Bravo 7 turned back to Ash and stepped forward. Ash looked back at the woman, then at Briggs. Briggs shook his head slightly. Not a negation, more the involuntary motion of someone recalibrating. Harmon moved on. The second kennel. The third. Each new pairing drew the ceremony forward, but the room's attention had developed a divided quality, half with the stage, half with the back wall. It was during the fourth pairing that Briggs made his next move. He crossed the room to the kennel labeled Ranger, a 7-year-old Labrador retriever, explosive detection, cleared from active duty 9 months ago following a sustained period of anxiety response that had made reliable deployment impossible. Ranger was one of the program's difficult cases. He didn't aggress. He simply failed to respond, to engage, to acknowledge anything outside of whatever internal space he had retreated into. 9 months of patient reintegration work by 3 separate handlers had produced incremental improvement and no meaningful progress. This one, Briggs said to the room, without looking at anyone in particular, hasn't made meaningful contact with a new handler in 9 months. Behavioral withdrawal post-deployment. If you've worked with these dogs like you say, and now he looked at the woman, you'll know that's not a training problem. That's something else. He unlatched Ranger's kennel. The dog came out slowly, head low, tail still. He crossed the floor without orienting to anything. The flat, unfocused movement of an animal operating on instinct without engagement. He reached the center of the room and stopped, nose down, not sniffing, just resting. The woman moved. She didn't approach from the front. She came at an angle. Not directly, not a wide circle, but a gradual curve from the left side that brought her into the dog's peripheral field gradually, the way you approach an animal that has learned that direct approaches precede bad outcomes. She didn't make eye contact. She let her hand hang low. She dropped to one knee when she was still 6 feet away and waited. Ranger's nose moved. One slow, deep pull of breath. She waited. The dog's head lifted. Not much. 2 inches. 3. Enough. She moved the last 2 feet and her hand found his side. And what she did then stopped Briggs mid-breath. Her fingers found a specific point along Ranger's left rib cage. Not petting, not examination. A precise point of contact on a specific scar line, and held pressure there for 3 seconds. The dog's body changed. The rigidity that had been holding him like a frame from the inside dissolved. His tail moved once, tentatively, the rusty mechanics of something that hadn't operated in a long time. Briggs stared. The scar under her fingers had been documented in Ranger's medical file, the result of a fragment injury in Helmand Province in 2015. That file was internal. It was not in any public-facing documentation. It was not in anything an animal welfare organization or a civilian contractor would have had access to. He looked at her hands, then at the back of his own. "Are you a veterinary specialist?" he asked. His voice had lost the edge it had carried for the last 20 minutes. He didn't intend the question as a concession. It came out that way anyway. She didn't answer. She was watching Ranger, and Ranger was leaning into her side. "She could be contracted DVM," said the woman from the Civilian Adoption Organization in row 4, helpfully. "Defense contract veterinary work, they'd have access to medical files." Several people in the room accepted this. It had the shape of an explanation. It fit the gap cleanly enough that they let it close. Webb was not one of them. He had already seen what the database returned when he'd entered 27 Delta with the DevGru cross-reference. Defense contract veterinary work did not produce a secret classification lock at the DevGru level. It didn't produce any classification at all. He looked at Wallace. Wallace was still standing in the corner. Their eyes met briefly. Wallace gave him nothing. Not a nod, not a look away. Just the steady, contained expression of a man who had decided to let things develop. The ceremony moved into its second half. Harmon had regained his rhythm, the registrations were proceeding, and the remaining kennels were being paired off with a professional efficiency that gave the room somewhere to put its attention. But underneath the procedural normalcy, something had shifted, in the way the air in a room shifts when a window has been opened somewhere you can't see. You feel it before you understand it. Ghost was the last kennel in the line. Belgian Malinois, male, 8 years old, Kandahar Province Operational Deployment from 2013 through 2016. The paperwork described him as operationally retired, not recommended for civilian adoption due to advanced handler-specific conditioning and limited socialization capacity. He hadn't been assigned to any of today's registered candidates. He was scheduled for continued care placement at a military working dog facility in San Antonio. Nobody had opened Ghost's kennel yet. The woman walked toward it without being asked. The room noticed. Harmon looked up from his folder. Briggs went still in the way he'd been going still all afternoon. That particular quality of not moving that meant he was thinking faster than he was appearing to. She stopped in front of the kennel and looked at the dog inside. Ghost looked back. The dog had been watching the entire ceremony from behind his kennel door with an attention that was different from the other dogs. More focused, more deliberate. The quality of an animal that is not nervous, but is waiting. When the woman stopped in front of him, something in his posture changed. Not relaxation, resolution. The difference between a soldier standing at ease and a soldier returning to attention. She opened the latch. Ghost came through the kennel door and did something that made Briggs take an involuntary step forward and made 3 different people in the front row reach for their phones simultaneously. He didn't sit. He didn't stay. He lowered his chest to the ground with his hindquarters still raised. A full bow, a deep, formal submission that was not the defensive cowering of a frightened dog, but the deliberate, intentional deference of a working animal, acknowledging its handler. The room understood that they were watching something they didn't have a category for. Marlene Torres stood up. She stood slowly, the way people stand when their legs are uncertain, but their conviction isn't. She held the photograph in both hands. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, and then it didn't. "I know that dog," she said. "That's the dog in my husband's photograph from Kandahar, 2015. She looked at the woman. "There's a person in that photo who was cut out. Every version of that photo I was ever given, the person holding the lead is gone. They told me it was classified." The room went very quiet. "My husband talked about that handler," Marlene continued, and her voice had steadied now, found its footing in the necessity of saying this out loud. "He said that person had saved his life. He said he never knew how to explain what it felt like to owe someone something that large and have no way to repay it." The woman was looking at Ghost, her right thumb pressed against her closed fingers once, a controlled, small motion. The only one. "Classified operations still involve people," Briggs said, and his voice was entirely different from what it had been 40 minutes ago. Flat, factual, working through something aloud. "I've been in this program 31 years. I've seen every handler that came through the K9 integration track. I've seen every name on every unit roster that touched these dogs." He looked at her directly. "Your name isn't on anything I've ever had clearance to read. And I've had a lot of clearance." She looked up from Ghost. When she met Briggs's eyes, there was nothing defensive in her expression. Nothing performative. Just the level, uncomplicated gaze of someone who had been told something true and was confirming it. "Because the work I did," she said quietly, "doesn't get names attached to it." The room sat with that. It was Webb who moved next. Not dramatically, not with announcement, just the careful, methodical action of a junior officer doing exactly what his position required. He pulled his tablet back out, opened the cross-reference field, typed in 27 Delta again, and this time added a location, Kandahar Province, Sector 7, and a date, August 12, 2013. The result came back in 3 lines before the remaining fields blacked out. MOS 27 Delta, Special Operations Veterinary Specialist. Assignment, DevGru K9 Assault Troop. Last known deployment, Kandahar Province, Sector 7, August 12, 2013. He looked up from the screen. She was looking at him, not with warning, with the quiet patience of someone who had decided to allow something and was watching it arrive at its own pace. Webb put the tablet down. He didn't say anything. He straightened in his chair and kept his hands still. Harmon had been handed a message during the last exchange, a secure communication from Naval Special Warfare Command, brief and direct, time-stamped 4 minutes ago. Do not release K9 assets until identity of civilian applicant confirmed. Classification, review, pending. He read it once, looked at the woman, looked at the room. The journalists, the families, the cameras, the 63 people who had come for a routine retirement ceremony. And were now watching something none of the program's public affairs materials had planned for. He folded the message and placed it under his folder. He decided to continue. A man in a gray suit entered through the side door. No announcement, no escort, moving with the directional certainty of someone who knew where he was going. A laminated badge was clipped to his chest pocket. NSA. He crossed to Harmon, bent toward him, exchanged 6 words that the room couldn't hear. Harmon nodded. The man in the gray suit looked once toward the back of the room, a brief, assessing look that carried no surprise, and left through the same door. The adoption organization representative in row 4 leaned toward her colleague. "Intelligence contractor?" she whispered. "Could be," the colleague murmured back. "Or she's in some kind of witness program and they're monitoring the event." Theories filled the gaps the facts hadn't closed. That was the nature of a room full of people watching something they couldn't classify. They would reach for every available category before accepting that the thing in front of them might be new. Briggs had stopped reaching for categories. He walked toward the woman with a directness that cleared a path through the room's secondary noise. He stopped 5 feet from her, with Ghost sitting between them. His arms were at his sides. The 31 years of doing a difficult job with precision and care were visible in his face, in the way things show up in the faces of people who have done hard things long enough for it to become who they are. "That Ranger response for Olst," he said, "the lateral rib contact point. That's a specific field technique for post-deployment sensory grounding. It's not in the standard handling curriculum. It's taught in one program." He paused. "One." She said nothing. "The Dutch command," he continued. "Rustig. It's the same command set used by the Koninklijke Marechaussee training track, which was adopted into the DevGru K9 program in 2009. Not before. Not anywhere else at that level." Ghost's tail moved once. "And this dog," Briggs nodded toward Ghost, "hasn't eaten more than maintenance calories in 3 weeks. We thought it was a gastrointestinal issue. Ran all the workups. Nothing medical." He looked at the dog, then at her. He was waiting. The woman looked down at Ghost. The dog was watching her with the focused, absolute attention of an animal that had been many places and done many things and had decided that this moment was the one that mattered. "Yes," she said. It was the fullest answer she'd given anyone all afternoon. Harmon set down his folder. He was looking at the secure message he'd tucked beneath it, the one from NSWC. He was looking at the tattered edges of the protocol he'd been standing on for the last hour. He was looking at the woman who had walked into his carefully organized ceremony with nothing but a piece of folded paper and the kind of stillness that takes years to learn and a lifetime to earn. He opened his mouth. "Ma'am, who are you?" The question landed in the room and stayed there. 63 people holding the same breath. She looked at him. There was no triumph in her expression, no satisfaction, no readiness to perform the answer for the room. "I'm the person asking for the dogs," she said. And then Corporal Vance, who had been standing against the sidewall feeling increasingly peripheral to events he didn't understand, made a decision based on the clear and simple directive he'd been given at the start of the shift. Unauthorized personnel were to be escorted out. He crossed the room. He put his hand on her forearm. Not rough, not gentle, just the procedural contact of someone executing a directive. His intention was to guide her toward the side door. What happened next took less than 1 second. She turned with the smooth, economical rotation of someone who had spent years training her body to respond before thought caught up, and his grip slid off her wrist as cleanly as water off glass. It wasn't a technique she deployed, it was a technique she was. The motion carried her arm up, and the motion carried her sleeve with it. The room saw the inside of her right forearm. The sleeve had ridden up to the elbow. On the inside of her forearm, starting at the wrist and running 4 inches toward the elbow, was a scar, curved and pale, the distinctive crescent pattern of a pressure wave injury, the kind produced when an improvised explosive device detonates within a certain radius of a human body. Doctors who treated combat casualties recognized that shape immediately. Several people in the room did. Above it, wrapping the lower bicep, a tattoo, black ink, clean lines, worn slightly with time, a skull wearing a beret. Below it, a number, 7. Surrounding both in a circle, text in a small, precise font. DevGru K9. Assault troop. Ghost element. Never leave one behind. 3 seconds of silence. In those 3 seconds, every dog and every kennel on the stage went quiet. They had been restless throughout the ceremony, shifting weight, moving in their kennels, producing the low ambient sound of 11 working dogs in a contained space. In those 3 seconds, all of it stopped. 11 dogs, 11 stillnesses, 11 tails that began slowly to move. Marlene Torres made a sound that was not quite a word. Briggs's clipboard hit the floor. Wallace stepped away from the wall. 3 seconds of silence has a different quality from regular silence. Regular silence is the absence of sound. This kind was the presence of something else, a held breath that 63 people were sharing without agreeing to. The collective pause of a room that had just seen something it didn't have a framework for and was waiting for the world to provide one. All 11 dogs were still. The kennels on the stage, which had been producing the steady ambient noise of working animals in a confined space, the shift of weight, the soft percussion of a tail against metal, the low breath of a dog testing the air, had gone completely quiet. Not startled quiet, not frightened quiet, the particular stillness of animals that had recognized something and were waiting to see what would happen next. On the inside of her right forearm, pale against the faint olive of her skin, the crescent scar caught the fluorescent light of the reception hall and held it, and above it, the tattoo, black ink, worn slightly at the edges, the way ink wears when it has been through weather and years and things that put wear on a person from the inside out. A skull with a beret, the number 7, and in small, precise letters, arranged in a ring, Devgru K9. Assault troop. Ghost element. Never leave one behind. Corporal Vance stood with his hand still raised from the motion of reaching for her arm, looking at the tattoo the way a man looks at something that has just reclassified every assumption he made in the last hour. His mouth was open. He closed it. He took one careful step backward. Dana Rice had her camera up. The red recording light was on. She was not speaking into it. Master Chief Wallace crossed the room. He didn't hurry. He moved with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who had been waiting for this particular moment and had decided that it deserved to arrive without being rushed. The room parted for him without knowing why. Something in the way he moved made space for itself. He stopped 3 feet from the woman and looked at her for a long moment. His hands were still. His expression had arrived finally, at the thing it had been working toward since he'd first seen her standing at the back wall. Then he stood straight, not the posture of ceremony, not the practiced positioning of formal occasions, but the real thing, the instinctive alignment of a man's spine when he is in the presence of something that earns it. "Petty Officer First Class Maya Reeves," he said. His voice was even and clear and carried to every corner of the room without effort. "Ghost Element 7, DE5, GR, UK9 Assault Troop." The name landed in the silence and stayed there, the way a stone stays in water after the ripples have moved out from it. Harmon's head came up from the folder he'd been gripping with both hands. He looked at Wallace, then at the woman, at Maya, then back at Wallace as though the triangulation might produce a result his own understanding had refused to generate. Briggs hadn't moved since his clipboard hit the floor. He was still in the same position. Forward weight, arms not quite at his sides, the posture of a man interrupted mid-motion by something that stopped all other motion. He was looking at Maya with an expression that had cleared itself of everything except attention. Marlene Torres was standing. She hadn't chosen to stand. Her body had made the decision before the thought arrived. Her hands were pressed flat against her sternum, the photograph caught between her palms and her chest, and she was looking at Maya with the wide, fractured focus of a woman who has been carrying a question for years and has just walked into the room where the answer lives. The room held. Maya did not look triumphant. She did not look vindicated. She looked the way a person looks when a door they have been keeping closed for a long time has finally been opened from the other side. Not relief, not release, but the still, careful expression of someone assessing what comes next. She pulled her sleeve down, slowly, without flourish. Harmon moved first among the officials. He reached beneath his folder and withdrew the message from Naval Special Warfare Command. the one he had chosen to ignore 25 minutes ago, the one that now carried the weight of a decision he would have to account for. He set it on the podium without reading it again. Then he reached for the sealed envelope that Wallace had placed on the edge of the registration table 12 minutes ago. In the quiet way that Wallace had done everything this afternoon, without announcement, without explanation, at exactly the right moment. Harmon broke the seal. Inside was a document packet 3 pages deep. The first page was letterhead, Naval Special Warfare Command, Coronado, California. The second page was partially redacted, black bars covering names, dates, and grid coordinates, but leaving visible the operational designation, Operation Dark Shield. Below it, unit identification DEVGRUK9. Assault Troop Ghost Element, Kandahar Province, Sector 7, August 12, 2013. The third page was a service record summary, partially declassified, with a photograph attached in the upper right corner. The photograph showed a woman in full tactical kit, plate carrier, helmet, gloves, the working gear of someone who went into places that required it. Her face was uncovered in this version. It was Maya's face. Harmon read the document. His hands did not move. His face did what faces do when the understanding in them has to reorganize itself around something new. The small, involuntary adjustments of a man recalibrating his entire experience of the last hour. He looked up from the page. "You were there," he said, not a question. The statement of a man confirming something the evidence had already decided for him. Maya looked at him steadily. "Yes." "Operation Dark Shield." He said it like the words tasted unfamiliar on his tongue, which they were. The operation had been classified at a level that put it outside the knowledge of most officers at his grade. "Kandahar, 2013, August 12, she said, 14:47 hours. Sector 7 Northern Approach." The specificity of it landed in the room like a second reveal. Not the tattoo, not the name, but the coordinates and the time, spoken in the flat, factual tone of someone reciting details that are embedded in them, the way scar tissue is embedded, grown into the structure of the person, impossible to remove because they are the person now. Harmon looked back at the document. 14 operators, 7 K9 assets. Contact with an estimated 40-plus insurgent force. He paused at a black bar. 12 personnel killed in action. 2 emergency evacuations. 1 personnel self-extracted. He looked up. 1 K9 survivor led out. 1 injured operator carried. The room was absolutely still. 4.6 kilometers, Maya said quietly. Under active contact. 13 minutes. 13 minutes. 4.6 kilometers. Under fire. With a wounded man on her back and 1 surviving dog on a lead, and the kind of concentrated forward motion that the body only produces when the alternative is not surviving. The specifics of it passed through the room the way cold air passes through a gap. You felt it before you understood it. Wallace was the one who added the piece the document hadn't included. He spoke to the room without directing his words at anyone in particular, just filling in what needed to be known. "She requested the redaction herself," he said. "Every version of the operational record that references Ghost Element 7's extraction. The personnel identification is at her request, classified indefinitely. No citations, no public record, no name." Briggs made a sound. It wasn't a word. It was the sound a man makes when something he thought he understood has been turned over to reveal a completely different shape underneath. "Why?" The question came from Webb, and it came out before he could decide whether asking it was his place. He looked down immediately, as though he could retrieve the question, then looked up again because he needed the answer more than he needed the discretion. Maya considered the question the way she'd considered most things this afternoon, without hurry, without performance. "Because the men who didn't come back didn't get their names in headlines either," she said, "and I wasn't interested in being the exception." The room breathed. It was a single sentence, and it was the whole architecture of the thing. The reason for the gray shirt and the unmarked attendance and the single folded document, and the 31 months of anonymous recovery from injuries that the medical reports, if anyone had been allowed to read them, would have described as extensive and unlikely to support full resumption of physical activity. It was the reason for standing at the back of the room instead of the front, for the silence instead of the introduction, for the patience in the face of an hour of dismissal and condescension and procedural obstruction. Not hiding, not performing humility. making a choice about what kind of person she was going to be in the aftermath of things that could make a person into several different kinds, most of them harder and colder and more armored than what was standing in front of them now. Marlene Torres couldn't contain it anymore. She moved from her row with the unsteady momentum of a woman whose composure has been doing structural load-bearing for too long. She crossed the center aisle and stopped in front of Maya with both hands still pressing the photograph to her chest. When she spoke, her voice was steady, in the way of things that are held steady by effort rather than ease. "My husband, Miguel Torres, Sergeant First Class 23rd Naval Support Activity." She stopped, breathed. "He was in Sector 7, August 2013. The room was very quiet. Maya looked at Marlene Torres directly. The first time in the entire afternoon that she had given someone that full, unguarded attention without the quality of assessment in it. This was something different. Recognition of a specific kind of grief, the kind that comes from losing someone who went somewhere they couldn't follow and never fully came back, even in the stories other people told. "He stayed with Ranger for 45 minutes, Maya said, under a rock ledge, north face of the ridge, after the first contact. He kept the dog calm when the dog wanted to run. That's the reason Ranger is still alive." She paused. "Miguel Torres was not a small person in the way he occupied a firefight. I want you to know that." Marlene Torres closed her eyes. Just for a moment. 4 seconds. 5. The way a person closes their eyes when they are holding something they have been carrying for a long time and have finally been given permission to set down. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice when it came was cleaner than it had been before. "Did he?" At the end, "He was not alone," Maya said, simply, completely. "He was not alone." Marlene Torres nodded. The motion traveled down through her whole body and settled. She brought the photograph out from against her chest and looked at it for a moment, then held it out to Maya. Maya looked at the photograph, her own shoulder at the edge of the frame, the cut line where the image had been trimmed to remove her, the dog ghost sitting against Miguel Torres's leg, in the flat light of Kandahar. She took the photograph carefully, the way you take something that belongs to someone else and that you are being trusted with rather than given. "I'd like you to keep this copy," Marlene said, "the one with the whole picture in it. I want you to have the version that isn't cut." Maya looked at her. Something moved in her expression, brief, contained, but real. "Thank you," she said. It was only 2 words, but from a woman who had used words sparingly all afternoon. 2 words from Maya Reeves had the weight of a paragraph from anyone else. Harmon had been standing at the podium with the declassified document in his hands, watching the exchange between Maya and Marlene Torres with the expression of a man who is revising his understanding of what kind of afternoon this was. He set the document down carefully, the way you set something down when you want the setting down to be deliberate. He looked at Maya. "Why didn't you present this documentation when you arrived?" he asked. The challenge had left his voice entirely. What remained was genuine inquiry, the question of a professional trying to understand the shape of his own error. Maya met his eyes. There was no sharpness in her response, no recrimination, no satisfaction at having been proven right in the most theatrical way possible. "Because it shouldn't have been necessary," she said, "and because I wanted to know whether what I came for would be given based on what I could show or what they could recognize." Harmon absorbed that, turned it over, set it next to the hour that had just passed, and looked at the full picture. "And the dogs," he said. "You came for the dogs, not the recognition." "The dogs," she said, "are the only reason I'm standing in this building." There it was, the clean center of the thing, finally visible. Not the career, not the classified credentials, not the operational record that would have made this whole afternoon unnecessary if anyone had seen it. The 11 dogs in the line of kennels, some of them retired from theaters she had walked through, some of them carrying the particular wear of animals that have been in the field too long and need someone who understands what field wear looks like from the inside. She had come for them, the rest of it. The afternoon's worth of dismissal and bureaucratic obstruction and Briggs's public challenges and Harmon's careful protocols and Vance's misguided directives, all of it had been between her and the door. She had walked through it the way she walked through everything, without making it the point. Harmon turned to Major Chen. "Process the adoption paperwork," he said. "All 11 animals. Immediate approval." Chen looked at her clipboard. at the tidy stack of registered applications she had organized over the last 6 weeks, at the procedural architecture of the Canine Transition Program that governed exactly this kind of decision. Then she set the clipboard on the table. "Yes, sir," she said. It was Briggs who moved next. He didn't speak first. He reached into the left breast pocket of his uniform and removed something small, something he had been carrying for long enough that the removal of it required a deliberate act of decision rather than a casual retrieval. He held it between his thumb and forefinger for a moment before extending his hand toward Maya. A dog tag, not military issue. The shape was right, but the metal was different, heavier, and the etching was done by hand rather than machine. The text on its face read, "Ghost 7. I made it," Briggs said. His voice was entirely flat, emptied of everything that wasn't the fact. After the program received notification that Ghost Element had been stood down, 2014. We were told the unit designation was being retired. Nobody told me what happened to the personnel. He looked at the tag. I kept it because I didn't know who to give it to. I kept it because it felt wrong to have a designation exist and not have something physical to mark it. He placed the tag in Maya's palm. 31 years, he said, and I've never once given that to the wrong person. She closed her fingers around it. The weight of it was nothing. A few grams of stamped metal. The weight of it was everything else. Webb had stood up from his chair at some point in the last several minutes without fully noticing the decision to do so. He was standing at the end of his row, with his tablet held against his side, watching the room with the expression of someone witnessing something they will spend a long time trying to explain accurately to people who weren't there. "Petty Officer Reeves," he said, and the formality of it was deliberate, a sign of respect rather than distance. "Naval Special Warfare Command has been in contact." He checked his tablet. "There's a standing invitation for a program consultation at Coronado, the K-9 Veteran Care Initiative. They've been trying to reach you for," he looked at the date on the message, "7 months. Maya looked at him. "I know. You haven't responded. I'll respond when the dogs are settled." Webb processed this, wrote it down on a mental list of things that were going to require him to update his understanding of how certain kinds of people operated. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Ghost had not moved from Maya's side since leaving the kennel. He was not the dog that had been documented in 9 months of behavioral reports, the withdrawn, maintenance-only animal who tolerated human proximity without engaging with it. He was sitting with his shoulder against Maya's leg and his head up, watching the room with the clear, operative attention of a working dog that has found its context again. His tail moved in slow, even strokes against the floor. Zeus had padded over from the spot near the wall where he'd been standing since the ceremony began its reorganization, around the afternoon's actual center of gravity. He positioned himself on Maya's other side without being directed, 240 pounds of combined animal flanking a woman in a faded gray shirt, and the image was so precisely the inverse of how the afternoon had started that several people in the room seemed to feel the reversal physically. Ranger came last, slowly, still with the particular carefulness of an animal navigating the world with attention to things that had hurt before. He crossed the floor and sat down in front of Maya and looked up at her, and she looked back at him, and there was a conversation in that exchange that didn't require language. "He hasn't done that in 9 months, said Dr. Patricia Howe, the facility's veterinary officer, from her position near the stage. She had been watching the afternoon with the professional attention of someone whose work was the well-being of the animals in front of her, and her voice carried the particular note of a scientist acknowledging an outcome her methodology hadn't predicted. "Self-initiated approach, contact-seeking behavior. We've been trying to reestablish that baseline for 3/4 of a year." "He knows what safe feels like," Maya said quietly. "He just needed to find it again." The room had rearranged itself, not physically, the chairs and kennels were where they had been, but in the distribution of its attention. The 63 people who had arrived for a routine retirement ceremony had become witnesses to something else, and the shift was visible in the quality of their stillness, the way people go still not from discomfort, but from wanting to see clearly. Dana Rice had lowered her camera. She was sitting on the edge of a folding chair near the aisle with the camera on her knee and the recording light still on, but pointed at the floor. She had a notebook open on her other knee, and the pen was in her hand, and she had not written anything in the last 12 minutes. She was looking at Maya with an expression that had undergone a significant revision from the one she'd arrived with. The human interest piece, woman tries to take home a whole litter of military dogs, had been the version of events she'd walked in holding. The version of events currently in front of her was different in kind, not degree. It wasn't more interesting than she'd expected. It was more real. It required a different kind of writing, the kind that didn't start with the camera up and the caption ready, but with the patient accumulation of what had actually happened. She clicked her pen closed. She would not file a story tonight. She'd known that for about 15 minutes. What she would file and when and how to do it justice, that was the work ahead. For now, she was just a person who had been in a room when something true happened, and she was trying to hold the shape of it, carefully enough to carry it out intact. Before the final moments of this story, if you've made it this far, you already know this channel is different. We don't just tell stories. We find the ones that matter. Share this video with one person right now, a veteran, a dog lover, someone who needs to believe that quiet people carry the loudest history. Subscribe. We have more coming. Don't miss it. The formal ceremony had, in the most technical sense, concluded. The 11 adoption registrations had been either completed or superseded. The stage had emptied of officials in the gradual, uncertain way of a formal proceeding that has lost its architecture and is navigating on improvisation. Families were moving, some toward the door, some toward the center of the room, the gravitational reorganization of people who are not sure the event is over. It wasn't over. Harmon walked toward Maya. He had left his folder and his document packet on the podium. He was walking toward her without the weight of the ceremony's official apparatus, and when he arrived, he was simply a man in a dress uniform who had spent an hour making a series of decisions he was currently re-examining, with the full honesty of someone who could afford to do so now that the stakes had changed. "I owe you a direct statement," he said. Maya waited. "I made assumptions about you when you arrived. Those assumptions were wrong. I acted on them in a way that was dismissive and obstructive, and I did it in front of an audience." He did not look away when he said it. "I'm sorry." The apology was clean. No qualifications, no procedural softening, no but the protocols required. Just the plain acknowledgement of what had happened and the responsibility for it. Maya looked at him for a moment. "You were protecting the program," she said. 11 animals, significant institutional investment, open public event. An unidentified person making a large claim. The response was proportionate to the information you had. She paused. "The information I chose not to provide." Harmon was quiet for a moment. "You could have ended it at any point." "Yes, and you didn't because I needed to know whether the answer was going to be yes before I showed them the reason it should be yes." She looked at him steadily. "If I have to prove myself to take care of 11 dogs who have already given everything they had to give, something is wrong with the system. I wanted to see the system. Now I've seen it." Harmon absorbed this. He was a man who had spent his career inside systems, and he recognized the specific weight of what she'd just placed on the table. Not an accusation, not a demand for accountability, but an observation made by someone who had earned the right to make it and was choosing not to make it louder than it needed to be. "The K9 transition protocols will be reviewed," he said. "Former handlers, including classified personnel, will have priority consideration built into the framework rather than exception processing." "Good," she said. And that was all she said about it, because she was not interested in the policy as it applied to her specifically. She was interested in the next person, and the one after that, and the dogs that would come through after these 11 had found their places. Briggs had picked up his clipboard from the floor. He was holding it against his chest now, arms folded over it, watching Maya with the expression of a man doing the kind of recalibration that takes time to complete. "I need to ask you something," he said. It was a different voice from the one he'd been using all afternoon. The challenge and the authority had been replaced by something simpler. Maya looked at him. "When you said that about Ghost," he nodded toward the dog at her side, "that he was waiting. How long had he been waiting?" Maya's eyes moved to Ghost. The dog turned his head and looked up at her as though he'd heard his name in the question, even though it hadn't been spoken. "Since August of 2013, she said. The room understood what that meant. 6 years. 6 years of behavioral withdrawal, of maintenance calorie intake, of the particular inward retreat that looked, from the outside, like damage, but was, from the inside, something closer to waiting. The facility had run every diagnostic. The veterinary staff had tried every reintegration protocol. The dog had tolerated all of it with the patience of an animal that knew, in the wordless way that working dogs know things, that what it was waiting for was not a protocol. Briggs unfolded his arms. He set the clipboard on the registration table with deliberate finality, the way you set something down when you've decided you're done with it. "I've been in this program 31 years, he said, and this time the 31 years wasn't a credential, wasn't a position from which to make a judgment. It was the acknowledgement of a limitation, the specific shape of what those years had and hadn't taught him. I've never seen anything like what I saw today. What you did with Ranger, what Ghost did when you opened that kennel." He paused. "I need you to know, if you ever have questions about any of these dogs' medical history, behavioral history, anything at all, my contact information is on the program roster, and I'll pick up the phone." It was the most he had to give. It was sufficient. "I appreciate that," Maya said. The families had begun to gather at the edges of the interaction in the way families gather, not intrusively, but with the weight of their presence making itself felt. A woman with 2 children, the children pressed against her sides, was standing close enough to hear. A retired master sergeant with a cane and a Vietnam-era unit patch on his jacket was standing near the back, watching Maya with the specific attention of a man who recognized something in another person that most of the room would take longer to see. A young woman in her mid-20s, daughter of one of the adoption registrants based on her position in the room, was filming everything on her phone with the unself-conscious intentness of someone who understands, without being told, that they are watching something worth preserving. A small boy, 8 years old, give or take, dressed in the khaki pants and navy shirt that civilian children wear to military events when their parents believe the occasion requires something formal, had worked his way to the front of the informal gathering around Maya. He was standing at knee height to most of the adults, and he was looking at Zeus with the focused wonder of a child who has found the most interesting thing in the room, and has no intention of pretending otherwise. Zeus looked back at him. The dog's ears came forward. His tail moved. The boy looked up at Maya with the frank inquiry of someone who has not yet learned to make questions smaller before asking them. "Is that dog sad?" he asked. The room softened. Maya looked at Zeus. The big Malinois was still watching the boy with those forward ears, his entire large body oriented toward the small person in front of him, with something that, in a different species, would have been called attentiveness. "He's been in a place where he couldn't be himself," Maya said. "It looks like sad. It isn't exactly sad. It's more like waiting for the world to make sense again." The boy considered this with the gravity of a child applying genuine cognitive effort. "And now it makes sense again?" "It's starting to," Maya said. The boy looked at Zeus for another moment, then back at Maya. "Good," he said, with the clean satisfaction of a person who has received the information they needed and considers the matter resolved. He turned and worked his way back through the adult legs toward his family. Dr. Howe had crossed the room to stand near Maya with a folder. Not official paperwork, but the individual medical records for all 11 dogs, the way a doctor brings a patient's chart when they are transferring care. "I want to walk you through each of them before you take them," she said. "Some have ongoing protocols, 2 are on medication schedules, and Ranger will need the bilateral hip support until the weather changes," Maya said. "The fragment damage from Helmand affects the joint in cold weather. He needs a sleeping surface off the ground, heated if possible, and the approach conditioning work should continue, but on the dog's schedule, not a handler's." Howe looked at her over the folder. "That's not in his standard transfer documentation." "No," Maya said, "but it's in his field medical record from 2015, which is also classified." Howe closed the folder, opened it again, made a note. "I'll add it to the transfer package," she said. She had the steady, practical manner of someone who has revised their expectations and is moving forward without making the revision into a scene. "If you have this level of detail on any of the others—" "All of them," Maya said. Howe made another note. The afternoon had found its new shape. The ceremony, formally concluded or not, had become something that didn't have a name in the program's procedural documentation. The organic aftermath of a reveal that had reorganized the room around a new understanding and left people moving through the resulting space trying to find where they fit. Wallace returned to Maya's side after making 2 phone calls in the corridor. He carried himself with the unhurried confidence of a man who has spent a career in positions where the work happens underneath the visible surface, and who is entirely comfortable in that space. "NSWC confirmed the adoption transfer," he said. "All 11, effective immediately upon paperwork completion," He paused. There's also a message from Rear Admiral Stokes. He wants to speak with you when you're available. Tell him I'll call when the dogs are settled, Maya said. Wallace allowed himself the closest thing to a smile he'd produced all afternoon. I'll tell him that exactly. He won't like it. No, Wallace agreed. He'll respect it, though. Lieutenant Webb found his voice again about 8 minutes after the tattoo had been revealed, which was approximately how long it took him to stop being a person watching something extraordinary and remember that he was also a person with a function in this room. He stepped toward Harmon with his tablet, pulling up the NSWC message thread on one side of the screen and the classification cross-reference result on the other. Sir, he said, keeping his voice at a register that wouldn't carry past the two of them, the secure communication from Naval Special Warfare Command, the one requesting identity confirmation before release of the K-9 assets, I think we need to formally acknowledge receipt and provide a status update. Harmon looked at him, then at the tablet, then at Maya, who was still standing in the center of the room with Ghost at her side, and the room slowly rearranging itself around her. Draft the response, Harmon said. Status, identity confirmed. Asset transfer authorized pending completion of formal documentation. Copy to Rear Admiral Stokes. Webb typed, sent. Watched the confirmation appear on his screen with the small, clean satisfaction of a task completed correctly, despite the hour of confusion that had preceded it. Sir, he added, I want to note for the record, the classification lock on Petty Officer Reeves's personnel file triggered automatically when I ran the cross-reference with DevGru. I was operating with standard clearance. I couldn't have retrieved any meaningful information through normal channels. Which means, Harmon said carefully, that there was no way for the program's administrative staff to have identified her prior to the event. Correct, sir. Harmon was quiet for a moment, looking at nothing in particular. That doesn't make this afternoon's proceedings look better, he said. No, sir. Make a note of that, too. Already have, Webb said. Across the room, one of the families that had stayed, a young couple with 2 children, the husband in civilian clothes but carrying himself with the particular posture of recent military service, had approached Maya with the tentative directness of people who have something to say and are uncertain whether the moment allows for it. The man extended his hand. Sergeant First Class David Park, he said. Retired Army Ranger, Kandahar, 2012 through 2014. He paused. I don't know the details of what happened in your unit. I wasn't there. But I was in that province, and I know the terrain, and I know what 4.6 kilometers under contact means. He stopped. Maya took his hand. I just wanted to say, Park continued, that there are people who went through that area who are alive, because units like yours did things that never got put in any report. We were allowed to read, and we knew that. We knew what was happening out there, in the parts of the mission we didn't have visibility into. He shook his head slightly. We never knew how to say thank you because there was no one to say it to. You just said it, Maya told him. His wife, standing slightly behind him with one child pressed against each leg, looked at Maya with an expression that was simply open. No performance of respect, no self-consciousness, just a person looking at another person and wanting the look to communicate something true. My kids ask questions about what their dad did over there, she said. They want to understand why it mattered, why the things that were hard were worth being hard. She glanced at her husband, then back at Maya. Today is going to be part of what we tell them, that people like you exist, that service can look like anything. Maya looked at the 2 children. The older one, a girl, about 10, with her father's eyes and her mother's direct gaze, was watching Maya with the precise, inventory-taking attention of a child who has been told something is important and is doing the work of understanding why. Your dad's back, Maya said to her. That means something went right. The girl nodded, solemnly, as though this had been confirmed for the record. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Chen processed it with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided that the best way forward is forward, and the 11 transfer documents were completed, signed, and filed before the last of the ceremony's attendees had finished their conversations and moved toward the exits. Harmon signed each page himself. Briggs witnessed. Webb notarized. While the paperwork was being completed, Maya moved through the remaining kennels, not to demonstrate anything, not for the room, but because the dogs needed it. She spent 3 minutes with each animal, not training, not handling, just contact, the specific intentional presence of a person the animal recognized as safe, given without agenda, without the performance of care that humans add when they're being watched. Each dog settled. The behavioral reports from the last 9 months, with their language of elevated anxiety indicators and resistance to handler approach and limited social engagement, described animals that were experiencing the absence of the one thing the clinical vocabulary couldn't name. Maya didn't name it either. She just provided it, and the dogs received it the way thirsty animals receive water, without ceremony, without gratitude performance, just the immediate physical relief of the body finally getting what it needed. The paperwork took 40 minutes. Chen processed it with the focused efficiency of someone who has decided that the best way forward is forward. And the 11 transfer documents were completed, signed, and filed. Before the last of the ceremony's attendees had finished their conversations and moved toward the exits, Harmon signed each page himself. Briggs witnessed. Webb notarized. While the paperwork was being completed, Maya moved through the remaining kennels, not to demonstrate anything, not for the room, but because the dogs needed it. She spent 3 minutes with each animal. Not training, not handling, just contact. The specific, intentional presence of a person the animal recognized as safe, given without agenda, without the performance of care that humans add when they're being watched. Each dog settled. The behavioral reports from the last 9 months, with their language of elevated anxiety indicators and resistance to handler approach and limited social engagement, described animals that were experiencing the absence of the one thing the clinical vocabulary couldn't name. Maya didn't name it either. She just provided it, and the dogs received it the way thirsty animals receive water, without ceremony, without gratitude performance, just the immediate physical relief of the body finally getting what it needed. The third dog in the line was a 6-year-old German Shepherd named Kilo, combat tracking specialist, 2 deployments in Afghanistan, 1 in Iraq. His file noted compulsive perimeter checking behavior and difficulty settling in stationary environments. When Maya stopped at his kennel, Kilo was on his feet, moving a tight circuit of the confined space, his nails making a soft, rhythmic sound on the floor. She opened the kennel door and stepped inside rather than waiting for him to come out. 3 circuits. 4. On the 5th, she was simply there, in the path of the circuit, and Kilo slowed, recalibrated, made a half circuit and stopped beside her without completing it. His body was still vibrating with the tension of the interrupted movement, but it was diminishing, like watching something spinning come slowly to rest. Dr. Howe, watching from the stage, wrote something in the margin of her folder. Not a protocol note. Something she wanted to remember later for a paper she was already composing in the part of her mind that ran parallel to the immediate work. The 4th dog, a Labrador mix named Echo, bomb disposal support, retired on account of partial hearing loss from a close detonation in Helmand, was lying down with his chin on his paws when Maya reached him. He didn't move when she entered the kennel, just moved his eyes to track her, the way a dog tracks something it has decided about and doesn't need to reassess. She sat on the floor beside him. Just sat. No technique, no approach protocol, no graduated contact sequence. Just the floor and the dog and the presence of someone who didn't need anything from the next 2 minutes and was therefore entirely available to be in them. Echo put his head on her knee after approximately 45 seconds. Howe stopped writing and just watched. The 8th dog, a Belgian Malinois named Cypher, the youngest of the 11 at 5 years old, whose operational deployment had ended when his handler was killed by hostile fire in Syria in 2018, had been the hardest case in the facility's care. Not behaviorally extreme, not aggressive or destructive, simply absent. He ate. He accepted handling for veterinary purposes. He passed his health checks with results that described a physically healthy animal. But Cypher did not initiate contact with humans, did not orient to voices, did not respond to name calls with anything except the minimal acknowledgement required to confirm that he was alive and attending. The staff had stopped expecting more. The grief counselors who worked with military personnel had a word for what Cypher was experiencing. Veterinary medicine didn't have an equivalent word, so the intake documentation described it as significant reduction in social engagement following handler KYA, and moved on. Maya stopped in front of Cypher's kennel for a long time before opening it. She stood there, 2 minutes, maybe 3, looking at the dog, looking at nothing. The room had gone quiet. In the particular way rooms go quiet when everyone in them has noticed something happening that they don't want to disturb. Then she said one word, quiet, not a command, just a word. She said the dog's previous handler's name. Nobody in the room heard it clearly, except the dog. Cypher's ears moved. For the first time in 9 months, according to Howe's records, Cypher's ears came forward, and his nose tilted up from the floor, and he oriented toward a human voice. He looked at Maya. She opened the kennel. He came out slowly, not the careful, protective slowness of a worried animal, but the deliberate, considered movement of something that is deciding to trust a thing and wants the decision to be made clearly rather than by accident. He stopped in front of her, looked up at her face. She crouched, put both hands on either side of his head. Let him read her, whatever dogs read when they hold that position, face to face, breathing the same air in the close space between. After a moment, Cypher pressed his forehead against hers. Someone in the back of the room made a sound, not a word, just the involuntary exhale of a person whose emotional containment has reached its limit. Howe sat down on the stage steps. She was a clinical professional with 20 years of veterinary work in military contexts, and she was sitting on the stage steps with her folder on her knees and her pen uncapped and not writing anything. "How did you know his handler's name?" she asked. Her voice was even, but the question cost her something. "He told me about him," Maya said, still crouched, still with Cypher's weight against her. "Who told you?" Maya looked up at Howe. "Cypher did." There were things that professional documentation could capture and things it couldn't, and this was one of the things it couldn't. The specific knowledge that comes from years of working alongside animals in extreme conditions. The accumulated literacy of someone who has been in enough places where human and animal survival were interdependent, that the language between them stopped being metaphorical and became something else, something operational, something real. Howe wrote in her folder for a long time after that without stopping. The 9th and 10th dogs, a pair of German shepherds named Alpha and Bravo, who had worked as a bonded tracking pair and had been kept together in adjacent kennels at the facility because separating them had proven psychologically costly for both, required almost no time at all. When Maya opened both kennels simultaneously, they came out and flanked her without instruction, taking positions that mirrored the formation they had used in the field, and the muscle memory of the positioning was so clear and so practiced that it was impossible to look at it and not understand exactly what kind of work they had done together. The 11th dog, a stocky, gray-muzzled German shepherd named Major, the oldest of the group at 9 years, whose operational career had included 3 combat deployments and a stint as a training program demonstration dog that had produced more certified canine handlers than any other single animal in the program's last decade, was waiting in his kennel with the particular composure of a very old working animal that has seen enough to have stopped being surprised by anything. When Maya opened his kennel, Major walked out, turned around once, and sat down directly in front of her with the formal precision of a dog performing a known behavior for a known person. His ears were slightly back, not flattened, just relaxed, the ears of an animal that has found its neutral and is occupying it completely. Maya looked at him. He looked at her. "Hey, old man," she said quietly, "you look exactly the same." Major's tail moved twice, 3 times, then steadied. It was the most personal thing she had said out loud all afternoon. Briggs had watched all 11 interactions from his position near the door. He had been standing there for 40 minutes, and the expression on his face had undergone the kind of slow, accumulated revision that happens when a person is confronted with evidence that doesn't fit the model they've been operating from. And instead of defending the model, they let it change. "Every one of them," he said when Maya completed the circuit. "All 11. "Yes," she said, "in 40 minutes. "They were ready," she said. "They'd been ready. They just needed the right person to be ready too." Briggs looked at the row of dogs, some at Maya's side, some positioned nearby with the relaxed attention of animals that had found their compass point and didn't need to keep searching. He looked at Major, the 9-year-old, the old hand, sitting with his ears back and his tail making slow, even strokes against the floor. "I've been watching animals my whole career," Briggs said. 31 years of working dogs, training them, deploying them, retiring them, trying to take care of them when the thing that gave their life structure was over. He stopped. I've never seen anything like this, not once, not in 3 decades. Maya looked at him. She didn't fill the space with anything. What you did with Cypher, he said. With Ranger, with Ghost, he shook his head. That's not skill. Skill is learnable. What you have is something different. It's the same thing, she said. It just takes a long time to learn. How long? She was quiet for a moment. About 6 years of being in the field with them, then about 2 years of recovering from what the field cost you. Then coming back. She picked up the leash stack from the registration table. That's the curriculum. Briggs was still for a long moment. Then he nodded. A single definitive motion. The kind that closes a subject not because the conversation is over, but because everything necessary has been said. You'll need someone for the ongoing protocol reviews, he said. The behavioral assessments, the medication checks. Some of these animals are going to need oversight. I know. I can do those assessments if you want a second set of eyes. Someone who knows their history. Maya looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, but a recognition of something that had cost him something to offer. I'd appreciate that, she said. Marlene Torres was still in the room when the last kennel visit was complete. She had not rushed away after the exchange with Maya. She was seated in a chair near the stage, the photograph in her lap, looking at nothing in particular, with the contemplative focus of someone sorting through a large accumulation of things that have finally been reorganized. Maya crossed to her. Mrs. Torres, she said, there are things about what happened in Sector 7 that are still classified. I can't give you all of it, but I can tell you that your husband was not a man who needed an audience to be exceptional. He didn't need anyone watching to choose right. She paused. Some people are different in the field than they are everywhere else. He was the same, exactly the same. Marlene Torres looked up at her. The grief in her eyes was old, worn smooth by years of living with it. A presence rather than an assault. He came home different, she said, not an accusation. A fact, offered carefully. Yes, Maya said, that happens. He never told me what happened. He was trying to protect you from the weight of it, Maya said. That's its own kind of love, even when it doesn't translate. Marlene was quiet for a moment. Does it get better? The carrying it? Maya considered the question with the honesty it deserved. It changes, she said finally. The weight doesn't go away, but you get better at distributing it. Marlene Torres nodded slowly. She looked down at the photograph, then held it out toward Maya again. You keep the original, she said. Miguel would have wanted the person who was there to have the version that tells the truth. This time Maya took it without hesitation. Outside the window of the reception hall, the San Diego afternoon was doing what San Diego afternoons in March do. Pressing cool light against the glass, the air carrying the edge of the Pacific, the sound of the bass continuing its ordinary operations around the extraordinary thing that had happened in this one building. Somewhere across the courtyard, a formation was completing a drill. Somewhere beyond that, the water. The last of the formal attendees had filtered out. The room held the quiet aftermath of concentrated human event. Chairs slightly displaced from their rows, coffee cups on table edges, a forgotten program on a seat. Webb was still there, standing near the registration table with his tablet, writing notes he would spend considerable time trying to organize into language that did justice to what he'd witnessed. Howe was completing the final medical transfer documentation with the careful attention of a professional who understands that these records would matter for years. Chen was at the far end of the room on the phone, her voice low and official, arranging transport, adjusting records, doing the structural work of making the afternoon's outcome administratively real. Briggs was near the door. He was ready to leave. He had his jacket, his clipboard, the accumulated gear of a man at the end of a professional day. But he was not leaving yet. He was waiting for something, though he hadn't consciously decided to wait. Maya was moving through the last preparations, confirming the transfer details with Howe, reviewing the medication schedules, checking the condition of the transport crates. She worked with the methodical attention of someone who had planned this afternoon carefully and was now executing the part that the planning had been for. The dogs watched her move through the space with a quality of collective attention that the room had given up trying to explain, and had settled for simply observing. When she reached the door with the first dog leashes organized in her hands, Briggs was still there. "Reeves," he said. She stopped. He looked at her for a moment. "Then, I told you that if Zeus let you near him, I'd write the paperwork myself." "You did," she said. "I signed every page." "I know." A beat of silence. "I was wrong about a lot of things today," Briggs said, "in front of a lot of people. I want you to know I understand that, and I understand what it cost you to let it play out the way it did instead of stopping it earlier. It didn't cost me anything I wasn't willing to spend, Maya said. That's the thing that gets me, Briggs said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite wonder and not quite regret, and was exactly the space between them. Most people, if they had what you have on their record, they'd lead with it. They'd walk in with the documentation up front. They'd use it. They'd make the room feel the weight of it from the first minute. He shook his head slightly. You let us make fools of ourselves for an hour before you showed anything. I didn't come here to make a point, she said. I came here for them. She nodded toward the kennels, toward Zeus, toward Ghost, toward Ranger, still sitting carefully near the wall, toward the 8 others who were watching the conversation, with the focused, patient attention of animals that have been waiting a long time for transport to somewhere new. The point made itself, she said. Briggs held the door open. All 11 dogs went through it. They moved the way working dogs move when they are with their person. Not the eager, scattered energy of animals newly released, but the organized, purposeful movement of a unit in motion. Zeus took the left flank. Ghost moved to the right. The others fell into a loose formation behind, reading each other, reading the space, operating with the collective intelligence of animals that had spent years working in coordination. Down the corridor, past the administrative offices where 2 enlisted personnel stopped their conversation and watched, past the notice boards with their base announcements and training schedules and K9 program updates, through the exterior door and into the March afternoon. The parking lot was ordinary, concrete and painted lines, and the kind of functional utilitarian sprawl that military installations produce without apology. Maya's vehicle was at the far end, an older model pickup truck, the extended cab kind with a custom canopy over the bed that had been modified with ventilation grills and interior lining. Not glamorous, extremely sufficient. She opened the side door of the cab and the rear canopy. The dogs sorted themselves, a few in the cab, the larger ones in the canopy, with the calm efficiency of animals that understood the mechanics of transport and were not concerned by them. Ghost took the position directly behind the driver's seat. Zeus settled into the back corner of the canopy with a sigh that was audible and absolute. The last to load was Ranger. He stopped at the step up into the canopy and stood for a moment, looking back at the reception hall building. The way an animal looks at a place it is leaving, not nostalgically, not with regret, but with the specific taking inventory attention of a creature that is completing something. Then he looked at Maya. She waited. Ranger stepped up into the truck. Maya closed the canopy door, checked the latches, walked around to the driver's door with the unhurried competence of someone completing a task they had been planning for a long time and were now simply completing it. She was reaching for the door handle when her phone vibrated in her pocket. She took it out, looked at the screen. The number was displayed as a string of digits with no associated contact name, a number that existed in no address book anywhere because address books were not the appropriate repository for what this number represented. She had seen it twice before. Both times had preceded something significant. She looked at the number for a long moment. Then she put the phone back in her pocket without answering it. She got into the truck. Behind her, through the rear window of the cab, Ghost was watching the building recede as she pulled out of the parking space. His expression, if expression was the right word for what a dog's face did, was the specific, settled quality of an animal that has made peace with the distance between where it has been and where it is going. Maya did not look in the rearview mirror at the building. She looked forward. The gate was ahead, the road beyond it. The afternoon light was coming off the Pacific in long, flat angles that made everything look precise and specific, each shadow cast exactly, the world rendered with the particular clarity that good light on the right day can produce if you're paying attention. The gate guard waved her through without stopping her. She pulled out onto the public road. The phone vibrated again. Same number. She drove. Inside the reception hall, the room was doing what rooms do after the event they were built for has concluded. Chairs being folded, lights beginning to cycle through their shutdown sequence. Webb was still at the table, still writing. He had stopped trying to make the notes efficient and was writing everything he could remember chronologically before it began to lose its edges. Howe had finished her documentation and was packing her bag with the thoughtful carefulness of a person who has had a professionally unusual day and is processing it by doing the next task carefully. Dana Rice sat alone in the third row from the back. Her camera was off. Her notebook was open, but the pen was capped. She was looking at the empty kennels on the stage, 11 of them, doors open, the cedar chip bedding, and the water bowls and the worn blankets still in place, already belonging to something that had moved on. She had a story. She had known that from the moment the tattoo appeared. The story was significant, was the kind of content that produced the numbers she was evaluated on, would generate the attention that the Tribune's digital metrics were built around. She was not going to write it. Not tonight, not as a breaking story, not as the dramatic reversal of a routine event, not with the headline that had been forming in her head since 1443 hours, with the kind of automatic professional instinct that she was, for the first time in a while, choosing not to follow. She thought about the phone call she was going to have to make to explain this decision to her editor. She thought about the footage on her camera, which was good footage, which told the afternoon clearly and without embellishment. She thought about Marlene Torres in the second row with the photograph pressed against her chest, and about the 11 dogs walking through the door in formation, and about the word ghost spoken in Wallace's clear, even voice, into the absolute silence of a room that had spent an hour looking at something without seeing it. Some things were worth more as memory than as content. She closed the notebook. In the far corner of the parking lot, the man in the gray suit, NSA badge, no introduction, 6 words to Harmon during the ceremony, sat in a nondescript sedan and looked at his phone. He composed a message with the compressed, specific language of someone reporting to an entity that preferred its information precise and its language minimal. The message read, "Asset confirmed. Ghost 7 active. Do not contact." He sent it. He watched the gate for another 30 seconds. Then he started the car and drove in the opposite direction from Maya's truck. And whatever organization he was reporting to received its message and made whatever note it made and added it to whatever accumulation of notes already existed under the file that probably didn't have her name at the top but had her number, her route, and enough context to know that the most dangerous kind of person was the kind who could walk into a room with nothing and leave with everything they came for, without making anyone feel the weight of what had just happened until it was already done. Harmon was the last official to leave the building. He stood in the empty reception hall for a few minutes after the others had gone. The podium, the empty stage, the row of open kennels, the table where the adoption paperwork was stacked and filed and formally concluded. He thought about the message from NSWC that he had ignored, about the 40 minutes of procedural obstruction that had preceded the moment everything revealed itself, about the fact that if the afternoon had gone differently, if Briggs hadn't made the challenge with Zeus, if Wallace had intervened earlier, if Chen had pressed the question of the folded document sooner, the outcome would have been the same. The dogs would have gone with her. She had the documentation. She had the claim. The outcome was never in question. What had been in question was the room. What it would reveal about itself when a woman who had given everything and asked for nothing walked in and asked for 11 dogs and was met with 60 minutes of institutional resistance. He had his answer to that. He turned off the lights. The road north of Camp Pendleton runs along the coastline for several miles before turning inland. On a clear March afternoon, with the windows down and the Pacific running blue and silver to the west, it is one of the more straightforwardly beautiful drives in Southern California. The kind of view that doesn't ask anything of you, that simply exists in its own completeness and offers what it offers without commentary. Maya drove with both hands on the wheel and the windows cracked enough for air to move through the cab. Behind her, Ghost had his nose against the gap in the rear window, pulling the outside world in through that narrow channel. The truck was full of dog, the collective warmth and breath of 11 animals settling into transport, the low ambient sound of 11 different resting rhythms finding a shared pace. The phone was quiet now. The number had stopped calling. She thought about the sealed file on Rear Admiral Stokes's desk, the one requesting her consultation on the K-9 Veteran Care Initiative. 7 months of unanswered messages. She would call. When the dogs were settled, when Ghost had slept in a real bed, when Ranger had found the ground-level support surface that his hip needed, when Zeus had mapped the perimeter of somewhere new and decided it was sufficient, she would call, not before. The road curved west, and the ocean came into full view. Maya let her eyes rest on it for a moment. That particular blue-silver that late afternoon, makes of the Pacific, the light coming in long and low and honest. She thought about Kandahar, August 12, 1447 hours. She thought about this afternoon, 1400 hours, 63 people in a room, 11 dogs waiting in a row of kennels, the particular weight of a room that had decided it already knew what it was looking at. She thought about Ghost quitting beside her leg, and about Marlene Torres holding the photograph with both hands, and about Briggs's dog tag in her palm, cool and heavy, and given with the undefended generosity of a man who had finally found the right person to give it to. She did not think about the number that had called twice from a sequence she recognized. Not yet. Ghost pushed his nose further into the window gap and exhaled a long, slow breath that fogged slightly in the cooler air outside. His tail moved once against the back of the seat. The light was good. The road was clear. Maya drove. In the reception hall, in the last chair of the last row, a printed program from the afternoon ceremony lay where someone had left it. On the cover, the official header, Canine Retirement Ceremony, Naval Base Camp Pendleton, March 14, 2019, 1400 hours. Below the header, in the small text that listed the ceremony's purpose, in honor of those who served. No names, no ranks, no designations, just the plain acknowledgement of the thing that mattered. The lights were off. The building was empty. The kennels on the stage stood open, 11 of them, 11 spaces where something significant had been, and was now, simply elsewhere. Carrying what it had learned in all those years of difficult places, carrying it forward, on the road north, with the windows down and the Pacific running silver to the west, and 11 sets of ears sorting the new air for whatever the world was going to offer next. Some people serve in places that don't get reported. Some debts don't get recorded. Some names don't appear in the version of the story that reaches the public. The dogs knew who she was. They had always known. That was the only recognition she came for, and it was the only one that was never in doubt.